Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Buenas tardes, damas y caballeros. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sung-Hoon Kim, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the International Civil Aviation Organization's 40th anniversary SkyTalks. During the course of a 2-week period, we have 68 presentations for you on a lot of several different matters. So I would welcome you to check out the ICAO channel on YouTube. We are in for a treat today, as this will be easily one of the most interesting SkyTalk presentations we'll have amongst the 68. Our speaker has a career which is illustrious and as colorful as his character. He is in charge of all air traffic management matters as well as airports, and works for our Air Navigation Bureau. We have Paul Adamson, who will provide you a presentation titled Global Reporting Format on Runway Surface Conditions. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and welcome to those of you in the room and also those of you watching online. So as mentioned, I will talk about the GRF, or the Global Reporting Format, and the title of my presentation is GRF, Be Aware and Get Ready. So you're perhaps asking yourself, well, what is the GRF? What is the Global Reporting Format? Why do I need to be aware, and what do I need to get ready for? So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll try and clarify those points to you. So by way of an introduction, the GRF is a runway safety related topic. Runway safety has for a long time and remains one of the top global safety priorities in ICAO. I think the priorities are control flight into terrain and loss of control. Within that sector, runway excursions are the highest risk category, the other high risk category being runway incursions. And there are some interesting statistics that exist there. I think on runway excursions, I think we have around 3 runway excursions a month around the world, so they are relatively common, thankfully not very often fatal. And also, poor braking action is a top contributing factor towards these runway excursions. And another interesting statistic I came across the other day is that 90% of runway excursions occur on runways that are not dry. And if you also consider that most runways are very often dry, that means that many of these excursions do happen in a very focused period of time when the runway is contaminated. So one of the mitigations for this problem is through the ICAO's Global Reporting Format, the GRF for short. It's set for worldwide implementation from November next year. It's not the only mitigation factor for runway excursions, and it does appear in the Runway Safety Action Plan of ICAO, along with a number of other actions that can be taken by stakeholders around the ATM and air transport network. So a bit of background on this topic. It's been around for some time now. So in 2004, the runway friction topic was included in the work of the respective panel, at that time called the Aerodromes Panel. For those of you that are not familiar with a panel is a group that is established within ICAO, consisting of a number of experts nominated by member states of ICAO to work on specific topics. So in this case, it's aerodromes, and the runway friction topic was included in their work program in 2004. And that's following a number of very high-profile runway excursions, some of which resulted in a loss of life. And a quick Google, you'll be able to identify which accidents we're talking about. In 2006, the Aerodromes Panel sent out a questionnaire on the topic of runway friction, trying to identify exactly what the nature of the problem was. And I think I wasn't there at the time, but I can imagine the kind of responses they got, talking about different methodologies being used around the world, different communications, lack of harmonization, different training, and even a lack of training. So I can imagine that really spurred the panel on to further its work. And indeed, that's what it did. And in 2008, the Friction Task Force was established, the FTF. This group is supported by many panels and many states and other expert groups, comprises of a group of experts on the topic of runway friction, and very eminent experts they are, and indeed the Friction Task Force exists still today and continues its work. Its main objective was to develop this globally harmonized methodology for runway surface condition assessment and reporting, the global reporting format we're talking about today. So, the development process, and this is quite important actually, I'll show a slide here that tries to outline the process that we've gone through. So we started back in 2008 with the establishment of the Friction Task Force. In that group we had 10 member states nominating experts and 7 international organisations, the likes of IATA, ACI and such like. So a very well-qualified group established in 2008. So it continued its work for a number of years, and in 2015 presented its work to its parent panel, the Aerodromes panel, where we have 17 member states, or at the time 17 member states represented, and again 7 international organisations. Now that group put everything together and sent out a state letter to the 193 now, I guess it wasn't 193 at the time, but all the member states of ICAO in 2015, and got responses. And everyone had the opportunity then to comment on the proposal, and we had 59 states replying and 6 international organisations. And of course their comments were taken on board. And after that, the proposal went to the Air Navigation Commission here in ICAO, where we have 19 members, or very highly qualified experts from 19 member states. And I think that's probably the most senior, what I would call the operational body within ICAO, within the air transport industry, indeed. So they went through the process and they reviewed the proposal. And then once it had been through that process, it went to the council, which is the highest body, and indeed the assembly is taking place at the moment, and that's all to do with the ICAO Council, where at the time we had 36 member states represented. Now the point here is the process went on for more than 8 years, involved many bodies and many member states and many international organisations, and they've all agreed and validated the global reporting format. So it has been agreed for implementation, and now the point is we need to get on and implement it. But before we do that, we need to understand what it is. What is the global reporting format? Well, the basis is really a standardized report and a common language for reporting runway surface conditions during adverse conditions. It comprises a runway condition report, just a very basic report, which is developed on the basis of what we call a runway condition assessment matrix, the RCAM. You can see that there on the right-hand side of the screen. It's really quite simple. It has a number of runway conditions and allocates a number to those. So the most basic one is dry. When the runway is dry, the runway condition code is number 6. And in the very worst case, 0. I can't read that there, yeah. 6, yeah. And the very worst case, 0, then that's really when the runway is covered with, I think the worst condition is ice with water on it, and various conditions between 6 and 1. So it's really, really very simple in its concept, which is probably how most things are. The best things in aviation are simple. Along with that comes some kind of description as well. That's not just a number, it's a description that goes along with it as well. So the pilot then uses that. He takes that information. It's broadcast to him via air traffic control or via SNOTAM. He looks at that information and then he matches that with performance data he has associated with his aircraft, and he can then decide whether it's safe to take off or land, or how much runway he needs to take off on land in the conditions that we have at the moment on the runway. So this methodology is very simple. It's based upon operational need. So going back to the questionnaire, going back to the accidents we had in the past, we know that we need to have this kind of common methodology, this common language. So that's been responded to with the GRF. It's very simple, so anybody can use it, and it's quite easy and cheap to implement, I would say. And the key thing is we have standardization, and so we have a common language around the globe, around the air traffic network, where people understand what the numbers mean and how they can interpret them in terms of aircraft performance and the distance needed to land or take off in adverse conditions. So the intention is that we will improve safety and in situational awareness. And I think I would like to add to that, we don't only improve safety. I think with such a methodology, we'll improve the efficiency of the overall network, because I can imagine that if you have a common understanding of runway conditions around the globe or around your local network, that will maybe help with your planning. And if you add on things like artificial intelligence, we can perhaps start to predict how runways will evolve, how their status will impact the performance of aircraft within the network. So I think it's safety above and beyond everything, but there's a little bit of efficiency and other opportunities that come in there as well. So we have two scenarios in the GRF. One is a scenario that we would probably expect to see, and we're quite familiar with in the previous methodology that people used, which is when it's snowy or icy. Everyone knows they have to go out and check the runway when it's snowy and icy and make some kind of report. So that's the basic GRF that I described. But we do consider the wet runways now, and that is something that is new. We now expect people to go out and check runways when they're wet, and that brings in states in tropical areas that may not be accustomed to going out and inspecting the runway, and they have to get used to that now. And there is a more simple methodology for them. They don't need to know about snow and ice and such like. And also, very importantly, in these parts of the world, the runway conditions can change very quickly. You have tropical showers, the runway dries quickly, then it rains again, and you have to be able to react to that quite quickly. So there's a more simplified matrix that can be used in tropical areas where you may experience short bursts of rain and changing conditions. Now that's described what we have in terms of the GRF. Now we have to roll this out. The applicability date, it has to be deployed and used as of the 5th of November in 2020. So that's why we're trying to build up momentum behind the deployment. And we face a number of challenges there. So we have awareness, planning, awareness again, I mentioned that twice for two very good reasons. The need for training, we have a lack of time now, and also the need for harmonization. So I'll just talk about those individual aspects in a bit more detail. So awareness, the first awareness. So right at the beginning, we realized that not many people are aware of the GRF. So we've had to try and do something about that. So the first action we took is we organized a global symposium here in Montreal, which took place in March. We had around 350 experts from around the world, or representatives of airports, ANSPs, airlines, and international organizations, and of course member states. They came here and we presented the GRF to them to get the ball rolling. Now, having people come here to Montreal, for 360 people to Montreal, is really not the end of the story. It's only the beginning. So we've backed that up with a number of regional seminars. We've run 5 of those so far. They're taking place around the different ICAO regions of the globe. The last one took place, I think, was in Lima about a month ago. There's another wave starting. The next one, I think, will be in Frankfurt, and then one in Johannesburg, taking place before the end of this year. Then another wave that will take place next year. So all in all, we'll run about 20 of those regional seminars, which will take the message closer to the airports, closer to the ANSPs and the airlines in the different states and the different regions, working very close with the ICAO regional offices, and they're doing an excellent job there in raising awareness within the regions. In parallel, we're working with the stakeholders here in Montreal and around the globe on taking communications actions, and indeed this SkyTalk is one of those communications actions. So we're trying to take advantage of all the many events that take place around the world to try and put the GRF on the agenda, to make people aware at safety seminars and such like that take place around the world, magazine articles, maybe even state-by-state workshops, that kind of thing, to try and get the message closer and closer to the users in the control towers, in the airports and such like around the world. And in parallel, we put in place a website, or it's more like a web page, I would say at the moment, on the ICAO website. It's quite difficult to find, but if you just Google GRF ICAO, it will take you straight there. And there we have a resource where we'll put together all of the reference material, contacts, and other useful information that may help raise awareness of the global reporting format. Now, planning, and that's really important. If we look back at the global symposium in March, I think planning is something that came up quite a lot. people need to start planning for this, and they need to start planning for it now. It's a state's responsibility to plan and implement the global reporting format. And we have put together a checklist. It's a very easy checklist to use, and you can see it there on the right-hand side of the screen. I don't expect you to read it. I'm just putting it there so you know that it exists. And the first point on that checklist is that states need to appoint a focal point and a team to deal with the implementation of this important safety-related matter. So that's the first thing, and it cascades down through contacting the airports, arranging for training and building awareness within the individual state. So that's a useful tool that people can refer to help them get started. The ICAO regional offices have a role to play as well. We have regional planning groups in the ICAO regions, and working together with the states, they can also help plan. Maybe we can plan for several states to implement at the same time so that we don't have different methodologies being used in neighbouring states around the world. So the regional offices are ready and willing to support planning and perhaps maybe help to harmonise individual states with their planning and their deployment. And of course, individual stakeholders have a role. As we raise awareness, airports become aware of the global reporting format. Airlines do, air traffic service providers. And if you're aware of the GRF but you haven't heard from your state, then maybe, or your regional office, then maybe you can go to them and say, hey guys, I've heard the GRF is coming along. We need to start working with this as of next year. Do we need to start doing something? And so individual stakeholders have a role to play as well. Training, I've mentioned that a couple of times already, and that is a very strong message that has come from the Global Symposium and also from the regional seminars, a consistently strong message. And it's not just for the GRF, it's for many things as well, but we've heard that a lot here. We need to train people, and we need to get down to the individual airport operations staff on an airport around the globe, to the individual air traffic controllers, and to the pilots as well. Everyone needs to know about this. And I think there are some 360,000 pilots around the world that need to know about this. There are 40,000 airports in the ICAO, with ICAO designators that need to know about this. And I guess there are tens of thousands of controllers around the world as well. In Europe, where I come from, we have 17,000 air traffic controllers. So many, many people need to know about this. To help us do that, we're rolling out a number of courses. The first one for airport operations staff is ready, and it's being used as we speak. That's been developed between ICAO and Airports Council International. It's a computer-based course at the moment, but there is talk of developing a classroom-based course that can be taken to individual airports and states. We are currently working on a computer-based course for flight crew and airlines, working on that with IATA. So that will be available in January of 2020, so very soon, so airlines and flight crew can start to understand how they use the global reporting format in their day-to-day operations. And for air traffic controllers, there are awareness activities underway working with CANSO, and we're discussing how far we need to go with that. Do we need to develop a training course for air traffic controllers as well? And we will decide upon that in the coming weeks. Time. Well, yeah, the clock is ticking. We have just over 1 year to the applicability date, which is the implementation date, when the GRF is supposed to be used worldwide. So the planning needs to start now if it hasn't already started. So as I said before, the first thing that states need to do is appoint a focal point, so they can start planning within their state, and the state, or the airports and airlines within the state, know who they can talk to about the topic. But of course, ICAO is here as well, so we're ready to talk to anybody that needs information, both here in Montreal and at the regional offices around the world. From all that, from this focal point and talking to ICAO, we need to have state plans, and we can have regional plans as well. As I said before, the regional offices can help maybe coordinate and have a harmonized deployment of the GRF around regions and groups of states. And states need to declare their intentions. They need to declare that they are going to deploy the GRF, or if they have some issues, let people know that they're going to have issues with deploying and meeting the date in November. So a suggestion has been, and it's quite a good suggestion, and 1 or 2 states are going to do that they have a shadow mode for the GRF, perhaps during the first season, which will be this season, hopefully. So that's a good practice maybe to consider, running the GRF alongside the current methodology that you might have. Harmonization, so that's something we talk about a great deal in ICAO. It's very, very important for such things as the GRF. So the harmonization can be achieved through planning, planning at state and regional level. It can be achieved through awareness, so all of the awareness activities that have been taken by ICAO and other international organizations around the globe. It can be achieved through coordination, so coordinating within a state, within stakeholder groups, with ICAO, having coordinated plans. And of course, through training, so all following a similar training course, similar training methodology, then we all understand what the GRF is and we'll use it in the same way around the world. So a couple of conclusions. So the GRF is an important tool in improving safety and, as I said, efficiency in the air transport network, particularly at airports, of course. It's been approved. I referred to the lengthy methodology and lengthy development process it's gone through, and it's standardized. It appears in ICAO annexes, so we have Annex 14, where it is a shall. We have to deploy the GRF, and there are a number of guidance documents that are available for people to better understand what that shall means. So we have Circular 355, the Aircraft Performance Manual, and it's also in PANS aerodromes as well, some information on the GRF. So these provisions are ready, with one slight exception. The Aircraft Performance Manual is just about ready. It will be released within the coming weeks. The training resources are becoming available. We have the training course for airport operations staff ready, for flight crew and pilots is coming, and awareness material for air traffic controllers is available, and maybe a training course in due course. So the call is, from ICAO to member states, start your planning and get ready for implementation by the 5th of November 2020. And in implementing the GRF, you're also getting ready for SWIM and some of the future concepts like trajectory-based operations. The GRF and its global implementation is ready for SWIM, to use it as a transmission methodology. And as I said before, having a global understanding of how the situation or the status of airports and how that will evolve within your network gets us ready for trajectory-based operations as well. So that's all I have to say. So the GRF, so be aware. I hope you are a little bit more aware now than you were 20 minutes ago. And now go ahead and get ready. So thank you very much for your attention. So I'm available to take questions.
Hi, Paul. Brett Wells from IATA. One of the challenges, obviously, because of this global initiative and because of the mandate, is going to be for the states, I think, in terms of how they manage with their members of responsibility the compliance. How do you see, or what do you recommend from a state standpoint in terms of how you track compliance of each of those members, from airports to air traffic control to airlines, in terms of how they should oversee that and ensure that the majority of their members have actually seen this and have a useful knowledge of it, rather than just having necessarily read the documentation?
Yeah, I think that's part of the planning, isn't it? That's part of establishing a focal point and a team who would identify who needs to know about this, and maybe lay down requirements with respect to training, for example. I talked about the training courses that are available, but that's not the end of the story. You probably won't just watch the course and then just go out and do it. So they probably have to lay down requirements with respect to some on-the-job training for airport operations staff. Some may already be experienced, just using a slightly different methodology. In some states it might be completely new, so that might require something else. So I think it's part of the planning, and the states probably need to we use their experience, I suppose. This is not the first implementation they will have done, not the first oversight they will have taken care of. So use that experience, talk to the airports, talk to international organisations who have experience, come and talk to us. And through that, I would say, put that kind of oversight into the plan and what you expect to do in terms of oversight. I think that's as specific as I can be. And it may vary from state to state, of course, so depending on the environment that you're in. So. Does that answer your question?
Yep, it does.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. No further questions?
Johnson at IATA. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about GRF in terms of integrating it with SWIM and TBO. If you could, a few more details on how you have a vision for that.
Yeah. Well, on the SWIM side, I think the GRF, when it was first conceived, was seen to be one of the first customers for SWIM. So I think maybe 5 or 10 years ago, we envisaged that SWIM would be here now, and we would transmit the information, the runway condition report, using SWIM. So we're not quite there yet, so we're having to revert to a revised version of the SNOTAM, which is something familiar that people can use, of course. But as SWIM comes along, the GRF has always been developed with a view to using SWIM to transmit the information around the globe. As I said, we're not quite there yet. With respect to trajectory-based operations, in my previous life, I worked as the network manager in Europe, and I would imagine, and I know, that if we knew the condition of the various runways around the European network, to use an example, and we were able to predict how they were going to behave, how the conditions might evolve, then that would help us with planning within the network. And I think for airlines as well, it would help them with their own planning and their own trajectory planning when we get down to actual trajectories, because I imagine that in the future, with a standard reporting methodology, standardized data, you can then start to, using artificial intelligence, use that data to predict how runways are going to evolve, when the runway might even close to snow clearance and that kind of thing. So it's a kind of futuristic thought, but I just think that having all of this standardized data from runways around the world, around a region, would help us to build a picture of how runways behave in snow and icy and wet conditions, and how quickly they're cleared, how long they're closed for, when they might need to close, that kind of thing. So it's a futuristic view, and it is only my view at that moment, coming from the network manager in Europe. So,
I like that.
yeah. Thank you.
Hello, Paul Stewart, Fox IATA. What would you say to states if they think, well, actually, we'd like to amend the version of GRF and implement a different version?
Well, going back to the development process, I would really question that. Why? Why do you want to change it? And we have agreed, and it is a methodology that is in ICAO annexes. Of course, ICAO can't force people to do things, but I would question why things wanted to be changed. Having said that, I did say that the friction task force is still in existence, and my view would be that, well, let's deploy the GRF today. Let's gain some operational experience, because it's not the end of the story. So maybe after 5 years or so, there may be things that people might like to change slightly, and there's a lot of discussion about the descriptors and the type of contaminants we're talking about. So maybe they might evolve over time, and perhaps states could be persuaded to, well, just deploy it now, gain some experience, and then we can, if we need to change things, let's go through the full process, use a friction task force, use the ICAO processes, and we can improve things in due course. But let's get the harmonization now, and let's get the benefits now. So.
Well, Paul, brilliant as always. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.